Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Appreciate you joining us today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to it. You can click that bell icon down below so that we notify you when we post new episodes. And be sure and share this video with others too. I want to welcome aboard Laura Edwards, the South Dakota State Climatologist. She is in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Laura, let's take a look at the weather situation now for the growing season in the Northern Plains. Okay, so far up to this point, it seems like the moisture content of the subsoil and topsoil in that area seems to be pretty adequate here so far this year, does it not?
Yep, well, it's kind of a mixed bag, depends where you're at. So if you're further west in western South Dakota into western North Dakota, Montana, that area actually has dried out and experienced increasing severity of drought conditions over the winter season, which is kind of unusual. We usually don't see too much change in drought in the winter season, and that's kind of held steady this spring. But if you're looking at more like central Dakotas to eastern South Dakota, yeah, we have seen improvements there recently. We had some dry conditions to start the season, and February, early March were exceptionally warm, so we lost some moisture across the landscape at that time. But just recently here in the last couple weeks, we've gained some moisture, which is great because April is a time of year that's really critical for rainfall, not just for row crops, for the soils, but also for our pasture, forage, and range conditions. So all around the board, April moisture gets really emphasized as we start our growing season.
Gosh, I remember a couple of years ago, I mean, it was bone dry up there, right?
Yeah, we're in probably the best condition we've seen for this time of year in about 3 years. Last year this time we were improving, coming out of some drought situations, but then it kind of turned around, again in the summer season last year. But certainly we're better off this year than what we've seen in the last couple of years. And on the other side too, we don't have a lot of excess moisture. We're not dealing with flooding and a lot of those other issues that we deal with in the Dakotas, in the James River, Big Sioux River, watersheds and so on. So I'd say things are looking pretty good. We're just waiting for the soils to warm up a little bit so that we can get out and get those seeds in the ground.
Now, how would you compare this past winter to the average in that part of the country there? I mean, was it a mild winter? Was it a snowy winter, a dry winter? What do you think?
Yeah, it was really mild. Very exceptionally warm. December was very warm depending where you were. It was record warmest December. Some parts of the region, eastern South Dakota, for example, was about 10 to 12 degrees above average for the month. So quite exceptionally warm. January was kind of near average since we had about a week of very cold weather, but that was basically the only extreme cold temperatures we had for the season. February again came back and was top 5 warmest in the eastern South Dakota region again. And top 1 or 2 for a lot of areas. So really warmth was the story. Moisture-wise, we had a real significant storm right over Christmas that brought rain and snow. And actually our soils weren't even frozen yet at that point, so a lot of that did go into the soil. And was held there through the winter season. So after that, though, it was pretty dry for January, February, until about late March when we started getting a little more moisture again. So warm and generally dry with the exception of that Christmas event over our winter season.
The most recent El Nino Southern Oscillation Index report that I got that's put out from the Climate Prediction Center, they alluded to the fact they think El Nino, you can stick a fork in it. It's about done, right? Now what as we move into the summer months here?
Yeah, El Nino is pretty much on its way out the door. And we're looking at a very rapid turnaround towards La Niña conditions. And not just to La Niña, but to something like a moderate level La Niña. And earlier than we typically see. Something in the summer, late summer, is when we're starting to see those climate models, those forecasts start to pick up this La Niña signal. here in the summer season. And that is what we've been dealing with the last few years in this region. Was La Nina in the summer often brings those drier conditions that has developed drought here, and looks like that is something in the works again for this summer, at least for the latter half of the growing season.
I know, being a farmer in northern Kansas for several decades, the term La Nina is the one that seemed to strike the fear into the heart of farmers there, because that usually always meant a drought, at least in the southern plains, or central and southern plains anyway. So that makes people a little nervous. I suppose the time of the year makes a lot of difference, though, doesn't it? If it doesn't come in until late in the growing season, if nothing else, maybe it'll actually help harvest.
Yeah, La Nina has a different impact in the winter season than in the summer. Like I indicated, in the summer, it often brings drier conditions to this region, but in the winter, it has more of a temperature signature, and usually means colder than average temperatures. In the winter, it doesn't tell us a whole lot on precipitation, so kind of a different story there. And that is what we're looking at in the longer range outlooks through next winter already. Looking ahead towards potentially colder temperatures, at least in the far northern plains region, which is consistent with what we've historically seen for La Nina.
Now, you and I were talking before we started doing this recording, and you recently took part in a kind of a conference call or a Zoom call with climatologists from all over what would you say, the northern third of the country or so. I believe that included people from the National Weather Service and that sort of thing. From what you could gather from that brainstorming session among everybody comparing notes, what did you come away with there?
Yeah, so that was kind of a coordinating call where we touch base every month with state climatologists and others around the region, some USDA and I'd say National Weather Service and others, and kind of getting a feel for what the impacts are, what are the climate issues right now, and really more active issues, I'd say, in the eastern Corn Belt. They've had some really, really over wet conditions in the Ohio, Indiana area. A lot of severe weather. Ohio has already had more tornadoes this year than they see in a typical year, and we're not even into May yet. But here on the western side of the Corn Belt, and relatively quiet severe weather-wise, relatively, more moderate, as far as temperature, precipitation extremes of late. And so, yeah, a lot of mixed bag stories. Far northern Minnesota still hanging on dry, and they're kind of missing the moisture that they typically get from snow up in that region. They didn't have very much snow this year. But I think looking ahead, I think all of us, at least in the western Corn Belt region, are concerned about this longer range outlook that's showing dry conditions developing this summer, where we're all, we've been dealing with dryness for so long, we'd really like to have a better outlook, but it's kind of tough news when we look at the long range at this point.
So if that's the case, then I would imagine you don't really look for any kind of a lengthy planting delay this spring then to get the crop in, do you?
No, we had a pretty early melt to the snowpack. We didn't have much snow here across the northern plains, north central states, up in this area. And we talked earlier here about drought conditions. Over these northern states, we had what we consider a snow drought. Just very little snow, more affecting recreation and tourism, not so much agriculture and water supply, but still, has an economic impact, and there's an impact from the snow drought. So, yeah, I think a lot of that snow melted early, though. Here in South Dakota, we saw a snowpack melt really first week in February. We were snow-free already. We've had a couple of snow events, since then, but they melted right away. So about 6 weeks early for the snow melt, and like I said, we still have our typical frost still happens in early May, for our last spring frost. So we're still a ways yet from being out of that frost-free, or being less worried about frost. So we have some time yet. We're just waiting for the soils to warm up, and we've seen them kind of pop up in that 50 to 60 degree range, but then they come back down again. And so we're kind of waiting for them to kind of level off and stay warm for a while.
Any telltale signals that you're watching in the central corn belt?
Yeah, soil temperatures are one of those things, kind of catching that window, for ideal conditions for germination. Although all across the region, it seems like planting is starting early. We're seeing, a few percent, corn and soybeans, go on the ground across many states in the region. So there are certainly some people that are starting out early. I think that, and just keeping an eye on the moisture. Like I said, this April, May, June period is really critical for this growing season this year, I think. Everything is kind of at a tipping point, kind of at a inflection point where every raindrop counts and every rain event counts, and hoping for timely rains because we don't see a whole lot of excess out there right now.
Have you had a chance to travel around the area to see if they've had much success getting spring wheat put in?
Yeah, I've been around a little bit around eastern South Dakota between Aberdeen and Mitchell and Sioux Falls area, and haven't seen too much activity, but I know some is going on. I visited with a few farmers that are planting. Winter wheat from last fall's planting looks really good out there at the moment. So we've had some warm and cool temperatures, so kind of keeping things moderate and nothing really far ahead of normal, but a little bit ahead of normal. So yeah, I think small grains are looking pretty good out here so far.
You are getting more and more dryland corn up in that part of the country, aren't you now?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of acres of corn and soybeans up here. I know people are staging equipment, getting things ready to go, but not a lot of people are really planting yet. And again, after the rain we've just got here earlier, about a week ago, there was some standing water in the fields, after that event. Some places got, 2 to 3 inches of rain, so it takes a little while for that water to get into the soil, move through the landscape. So things will catch up here, but as we look out the next week or two, it does look like we're going to turn back to kind of a wetter pattern again. So it'll kind of be catching those windows, I think, as we get into early May for some of those other spring-seeded crops.
Well, I know growing up in the Central Plains, we paid a lot of attention to the snowpack in Wyoming and northern Colorado. That had everything to do with the river flows, like on the Platte River and the Missouri River and Elkhorn River and some others. Explain how the snowpack is this year. I mean, some areas of the Rockies, they did get a lot of snow at some times, didn't they?
The data I've seen and what I've heard from the Colorado Climate Center is Colorado's snowpack looks, pretty decent for this time of year. They're still skiing, Arapahoe Basin, they're still skiing out there. And that feeds into the Platte River, and as you say, those rivers through Nebraska and Kansas. Looking further north in the headwaters of the Missouri River, so looking more in Montana, northern Wyoming, they're a bit on the dry side. Less than half of average in some areas as far as snowpack in the northern Rockies up that way. So, and that's very typical for El Niño winters. They see more precipitation in the southern Rockies than the northern Rockies. So that's pretty consistent with the long-term, history of El Niño. But yeah, not expecting, again, a lot of excess water through the Missouri River, and that's what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has outlook for this year as well for their runoff for the basin, for the river basin. They're looking at below average runoff in the Missouri Basin, partly because of lower snowpack, but partly because of the soils aren't quite saturated yet, and they won't get as much runoff, I should say, with these precipitation events.
Well, a lot of farmers and ranchers had to rely on irrigation water, for example, from reservoirs. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered what the reservoir levels look like now in the heartland of the country here? Are they adequate? Are they low?
I think they're adequate. I think they're in kind of the desired range for this time of year. I did attend a briefing by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers a couple weeks ago now. And so, yeah, I think they're okay. But again, there's not a lot of extra water out there around the region. Once you get below Sioux City on the river, there isn't much for, storage. And so they tend to see maybe some more flash flooding type of events if they get heavy thunderstorms and those kinds of things. But looking at the bigger reservoirs like Oahe and Fort Peck and up north, I think they're all adequate, but again, not a lot of extra water to use or save for later.
Well, Laura, I enjoyed talking with you, and thank you for updating us on the early conditions here for the growing season in 2024. More than likely, I'll check back with you a little later on this year, and we'll kind of compare notes again, see how things are progressing as we get closer and closer to, I guess, what is going to be La Niña at that time. So in the meantime, I wish you all the best, and good luck on keeping everybody posted.
All right. Thank you, Marlin. Appreciate the time with you.
You bet. Laura Edwards, the South Dakota State Climatologist, joining us today from Aberdeen. And that'll do it for this episode. Thank you for joining us today. For producer Brian Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time on the Comstock Channel.
Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget, you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.